Don't go. Please.
That plea echoed down the sterile hallway, a desperate cry that should have shattered his heart. But he didn't stay. He walked away from her, from their child, from the moment that would define a lifetime. And so the story begins, with that hollow plea echoing through a delivery room where hope and pain collide. She was alone when her labor turned brutal, each contraction a reminder that someone had promised to be there but wasn't. Her husband, David, vanished. Not late, not stuck, not unwell. He walked out. She gave birth while facing agony and fear alone. And when she finally held their newborn, her heart was filled not with joy, but with furious betrayal. That is the real strike of injustice. The man who claimed love left her in her weakest, most exposed moment. Tonight we tell the rest of that story, how she turned that desertion into a reckoning that shook him and stunned everyone who thought she might just fade into silence. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Who does that? And why? Was it fear? Or was it something colder? What kind of man hears his wife cry out, "Please, don't leave me like this," and still walks away? What could possibly be more important than being present for the very moment your child takes his first breath? These are the questions that haunted Grace as she held onto the rails of that hospital bed, her body racked with pain, her heart breaking with every unanswered ring of the phone. And these are the questions that would later haunt Mark too, when his choices were dragged into the light. Because Grace was not a woman who stayed broken. She was not the silent wife who suffered in the dark. She became the woman who turned betrayal into strength, who rose from the ashes of abandonment and brought Mark Turner, the man who walked out on delivery day, to his knees. And the deeper we looked, the uglier the truth became. We found the receipts, the messages, the route he drove. And the truth is uglier than you think. Grace Turner, steadfast, practical, a planner. Mark Turner, ambitious, well-liked, always a step ahead, until responsibility caught up with him. To their friends, they were solid, the kind of couple that made you believe in simple, decent things. Grace was the quiet strength in their marriage, the one who sacrificed to make their life possible. When she discovered she was pregnant, she wanted to create a safe and loving home, a foundation for their child. She quit her second job so she could rest, trusting Mark when he promised he would handle the bills. But behind closed doors, cracks began to show. He teased her about her weight, then brushed it off as a joke. He missed doctor's appointments, claiming he was caught in meetings. He rescheduled birthing classes, insisting his time was stretched thin. And through it all, Grace carried every burden, her body, her emotions, her fears, while Mark carried nothing but his ego. Grace believed in him, even when others warned her he was drifting. She told herself the stress of impending fatherhood had unsettled him. She explained away the late nights and the quiet mornings, the dinners eaten alone, the glances at his phone when he thought she wasn't watching. She thought love would hold it all together, that once he saw their child, he would become the man she knew he could be. But with every promise he failed to keep, Grace was being prepared for the truth. Mark was not simply distracted. He was already choosing himself over the family he had created. And on the night the contractions started, he made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his life. The night that should have been remembered as the beginning of a new life became the night Grace Turner would never forget for all the wrong reasons. Her contractions began suddenly, sharp waves of pain that stole her breath and quickened her pulse. She called out for Mark Turner, but he was nowhere to be found. She dialed his number again and again, each ring stretching longer than the last, her panic rising with every unanswered call. 16 times her thumb hit dial, 16 times his phone buzzed without response. The nurse asked quietly if her husband was on his way, and Grace forced a trembling nod, swallowing her fear, clinging to the hope that at any moment he would burst through those hospital doors. But the chair beside her bed stayed empty. a silent witness to the unraveling of every promise he had ever made. At that same hour, across town, Mark's car sat parked outside a townhouse. Behind the closed blinds, a different story was unfolding, not one of fear and devotion, but one of selfishness and betrayal. The woman who opened the door was not Grace, but Sophia, someone Mark had found comfort in while his wife carried his child. Instead of being by Grace's side as she fought for her life and the life of their baby, he chose to be with another. Grace's phone continued to glow in the dark, her desperate calls unanswered. And in that sterile hospital room, through the haze of agony, her voice cracked into a plea that should have stopped him in his tracks. "Please, don't leave me like this. Please." But he did. He turned his back, choosing absence over loyalty, betrayal over duty, cowardice over courage. At the very hour his son Noah was fighting his way into the world, Mark chose to disappear. He was not late. He was not lost. He was not trapped. He was absent by choice. The empty chair by Grace's bedside told the whole story. A woman abandoned in her most vulnerable moment, forced to bear the unbearable without the man who vowed to stand beside her. When Noah's cry finally filled the room, it should have been a sound met with pride, relief, and shared joy. Instead, it echoed against the hollow space Mark left behind. Grace survived the delivery. So did Noah. But the old Grace, the trusting, forgiving Grace, she was gone forever. Grace Turner walked out of that hospital with her newborn son in her arms, but she walked out alone. The wheelchair creaked as the nurse pushed her through the automatic doors, her face pale, her body weak, and her eyes hollow from both exhaustion and betrayal. The seat beside her, the one that should have been filled by Mark Turner, sat empty, a void more painful than the hours of labor she had just endured. She had imagined this moment differently. A proud father, tears streaming down his face as he carried their baby to the car, promises of a new chapter beginning. Instead, she clutched Noah to her chest, pressing her cheek against his tiny forehead, whispering that she would never let him feel the emptiness she felt in that moment. The community noticed the absence too. Neighbors whispered from porches, friends raised questions in hushed tones, even family members demanded answers. But Mark Turner offered none. He retreated into silence, his absence becoming louder than any excuse could ever be. At home, the reality hit harder. Grace sat on the porch in the fading evening light, rocking Noah with one arm while wiping tears from her eyes with the other. Her phone lay on the table beside her, the screen flashing a cruel reminder, call logs filled with her unanswered attempts to reach her husband. 16 times she begged for his presence, and 16 times he ignored her. Local women from the church walked past, their whispers sharp, carrying judgment mixed with pity. Some asked if Mark had fallen ill, others speculated that fear had driven him away. But Grace knew in her heart this was not weakness, this was choice. Imagine bringing life into the world only to return home to silence, not because fate had stolen him from you, not because tragedy had struck, but because he chose to walk away. That realization struck harder than any contraction ever had. But silence doesn't stay hidden forever. The truth leaves footprints, receipts, and shadows that cannot be erased. Slowly, pieces of Mark Turner's absence began to surface. He was seen driving across town on the very night Noah was born, not lost, not in confusion, but with purpose. Receipts emerged, dinners charged to his card, hotel slips bearing his signature, flowers delivered with his name scribbled at the bottom of notes. None of these things were for Grace. The addresses led elsewhere, to a townhouse where Sophia lived, the same woman who had opened her door to him while his wife fought for her life in a hospital bed. These discoveries were not whispered theories. They were facts, laid bare in black and white, undeniable and cruel. Grace held the receipts in her trembling hands, staring at the proof that her abandonment was not an accident, not a fleeting moment of weakness. It was a deliberate choice. When the full picture became clear, heartbreak was no longer the right word. Heartbreak implies fragility, an ending of love. What Grace felt was rage, sharp and searing, fueled by the knowledge that Mark had not just betrayed her, but had betrayed Noah from the moment he took his first breath. He wasn't hiding in shame, he was living a double life. While she clutched their newborn son, whispering promises of safety and love, Mark was clinking glasses in another home, offering flowers that were not hers, spending money that should have supported his family on someone else. The man who vowed to protect her, who swore to stand by her, had done the unthinkable. He had chosen deceit over loyalty, comfort over courage, and selfishness over fatherhood. And in that knowledge, Grace found something powerful. Her pain turned to fury, and her fury turned to resolve. The tears she cried no longer weakened her, they sharpened her. She was no longer the woman begging in the hospital bed. She was a mother with a truth that would not stay hidden, and a betrayal so deep it demanded to be answered. Because buried inside Mark Turner's lies was a truth darker than Grace could have ever imagined. A truth that would shatter everything he thought was untouchable, and leave him facing consequences he never expected. Grace Turner knew something deeper was hidden beneath Mark Turner's silence. And when the evidence finally landed in her hands, every suspicion she had tried to push aside came roaring into focus. The envelope felt heavier than paper should, filled with receipts that weren't hers, text messages that weren't sent to her, and photographs that spoke louder than any denial he could muster. One hotel slip showed his name, the date stamped with cruel precision, the very night Noah was born. Another receipt revealed an expensive dinner charged to his card, complete with a note for flowers delivered to a townhouse address she recognized all too well. But it was the messages that cut the sharpest. Words meant to seduce. Promises made to another woman while she lay in a hospital bed begging for his presence. "She'll never know." One text read, "Tonight, I'm all yours." It was no accident. It was no mistake. It was calculated betrayal, carefully arranged, designed in advance while Grace carried his child and waited for him to keep the simplest promise a man could make, to show up. This wasn't panic. This wasn't weakness. Mark Turner hadn't run because fear overcame him. He hadn't stayed away because he lost his way or because his heart couldn't handle the sight of blood and pain. He stayed away because he wanted to. He chose Sophia Lane over his wife and child. He planned it. He scheduled betrayal into the very night his son entered the world. The man who had sworn to love Grace through sickness and health, through better and worse, made his choice at the most defining hour of their lives, and he chose someone else. And for Grace, something snapped. She had cried enough tears. She had begged enough pleas. The words that once poured out of her in desperation, "Please, don't leave me like this. Please," were no longer the words of a broken woman. They became the anthem of a woman who understood just how deep betrayal could run and how much power she had left in reclaiming herself from it. Grace didn't collapse under the weight of this discovery. She didn't sink into the shadows or retreat into silence. That moment, that revelation, was when she broke, not down, but free. Free from illusions, free from empty promises, free from a marriage that existed only in appearances and lies. Holding Noah in one arm and the evidence in the other, she understood that Mark Turner's betrayal was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new one. The whispers in the community that had once filled her with shame now fueled her with determination. If he thought she would suffer quietly, he was wrong. If he thought she would vanish into silence, he underestimated the strength of a mother betrayed. Because Grace Turner wasn't going to simply survive this. She wasn't going to accept being the woman left behind. She wasn't going to let Mark Turner's decision define her life or Noah's future. She was going to turn that betrayal against him, and the consequences would ripple far beyond what he ever imagined. The receipts, the texts, the photographs, those weren't just proof of infidelity. They were the keys to exposing who he really was. Not a devoted husband, not a proud father, but a man who abandoned his wife and son on the day they needed him most. And Grace knew exactly what to do with the truth. She wasn't just going to survive this betrayal. She was going to make sure Mark Turner lived with it, carried it, and was crushed beneath the weight of it. because betrayal cuts two ways, and Grace Turner was ready to show him just how sharp it could be. Grace Turner rebuilt herself from the ashes of betrayal. What Mark Turner thought would destroy her only forced her to grow stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. She raised Noah with grit and defiance, pouring every ounce of energy into giving him the life Mark had thrown away. When she worked late nights at the hospital, she whispered to her son that she was doing it for him. When she studied for new certifications, pushing herself to climb higher, it was Noah's laughter that kept her moving forward. She became both mother and father, protector and provider, and the world around her took notice. Where others expected her to collapse, she rose. And Noah, who had entered the world in chaos, grew into a young man defined not by abandonment but by resilience. He was strong, intelligent, disciplined, a living reminder that Grace's strength had carried them both through the storm. Meanwhile, Mark Turner's carefully built world began to collapse under its own weight. His career faltered, opportunities slipped away, and whispers about his betrayal followed him everywhere. Debt crept in where stability once lived, and Sophia Lane, the woman for whom he sacrificed everything, vanished when the weight of his failures became too much to bear. What he traded for a night of selfish indulgence dissolved into nothing. The man who once thought he could walk away from his wife and child, untouched by consequences, found himself standing in ruins, a shell of the ambitious husband he once pretended to be. The same community that once admired him now avoided him. Friends distanced themselves. Respect evaporated. Mark Turner, who had chosen absence, was now left with emptiness. The true reckoning came years later, in a setting neither of them could have predicted. Grace Turner walked into a public event, Noah by her side, tall, confident, and successful. The boy Mark abandoned had grown into the kind of man every father would want to claim, but Mark had no right to. The room shifted when they entered, whispers rippling as people recognized the strength of the woman and son who had thrived despite the odds. And then, in the crowd, eyes met, the betrayer and the betrayed. Mark Turner stood frozen, older now, beaten down, his shoulders hunched under the invisible weight of choices that could not be undone. His face dropped as he stared at Noah, the child he had once abandoned, now a man standing proudly beside the mother he underestimated. For Grace, it was the moment everything came full circle. She didn't need words, she didn't need confrontation. Her presence, her survival, and her son's success were the only response she would ever need. The man who once left her begging, "Please, don't leave me like this. Please," now stood powerless, forced to witness the living proof of everything he had thrown away. The whispers around them grew louder, people shaking their heads, some murmuring in disgust at the man who had walked out on his family, others expressing admiration for the woman who had refused to be broken. Noah embraced his mother, a simple gesture of love and loyalty, while Mark stood alone in the shadows, consumed by regret. Grace didn't need revenge through violence. She didn't need to scream, or fight, or destroy. Her revenge was survival. Her revenge was strength. Her revenge was letting Mark Turner live with the unbearable truth that the family he abandoned had risen without him, that his absence had not ruined them but ruined him. Her success, her dignity, her unwavering resilience were the verdict. He was guilty not in a court of law, but in the court of life itself, condemned to watch from the sidelines as Grace Turner and Noah thrived. And that was the final twist. The woman Mark thought he had left broken had become unbreakable, and the son he thought he could ignore had grown into the clearest mirror of his own failure. Grace Turner's life became the answer to every question his betrayal had left behind. She didn't just survive, she triumphed. Grace Turner's story does not end in silence. It ends with a question, one that lingers, sharp and uncomfortable, long after the final words fade. So what do you think? Was justice served? Or did Mark Turner get off too easy? When a man abandons his wife on the very day she brings his child into the world, what punishment could ever balance the scale? Is it enough that he lives with the humiliation, the regret, the whispers that follow him everywhere? Or should the price have been greater? These are the questions only you, the viewers, can wrestle with, because betrayal at this level is more than personal. It cuts into the very idea of loyalty, family, and honor. Grace Turner rebuilt her life. She raised Noah into a man of dignity and success, and she stood unbroken before the one who thought he could shatter her. But when you weigh it all, was that enough justice? Or should he have felt even more of what he inflicted? And that is where we turn to you. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Every story we tell is a reminder that choices have consequences, that silence can be louder than words, and that betrayal is never hidden forever. The world watched Grace Turner fall, and then watched her rise, and in that rise we saw a truth worth remembering. The greatest revenge is living well, standing tall, and letting those who betrayed you live in the shadow of their own choices. And if you thought this was shocking, wait until you hear about the woman who uncovered her husband's secret double life at his own funeral. That story, like Grace Turner's, is one you will not forget.